Hey there. So today we're going to be talking about the situation on the ground, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the targets on the ground that Ukraine would like to have an option to end this war. Let's start by looking around the Kharkiv area. We can say that this area by now is pretty much cleared. I'm expecting there might be just fringe groups that are still left because Vladimir Zelensky has visited Izium, and that means that the area is more or less safe and we're not expecting anything major to happen. So what's around Kharkiv? As you can see, it's actually quite nice because Deep State has really caught up. So what we saw is that Russians, they were able to stay here for a little while around after the Oskil River, but as the Sviatokhorsk was taken, they understood that this would be a problem and they retreated a little bit here. So that was clear. Additionally, we know definitely that around Borova, there was not completely clear if Ukrainians took Borova or not, because I did not see any proofs of that. But we definitely know that Ukrainians are having like a bridgehead over the river of Oskil around Borova and around Kupiansk-Vuzlovi. That's the two kind of directions where Ukrainians have crossed the river. And now we can say that this area here at the south is also 3. So we know that Ukrainians are looking to, but whenever their time comes to get into Luhansk region, they have the 3 options, A, B, or C, to advance to it. Importantly, around these areas, we know that Russians, I'm going to actually go up here. There has been multiple reports with proofs that Russians have left Kremnina and Svatove, and the troops went south. And we were wondering where they're going to go, and now we know. They went to support Liman, they went to support Yampil, and they want to support Bilohorivka, because these are the 3 places where Ukrainians right now are pushing the hardest. And we saw a lot of columns of Russian troops coming into this region to support this. Why this is relevant? Because if this falls, or if Liman falls, Yampil also falls in that category. That would create basically a advance towards Kremnina that is now almost completely without Russian troops because they all were sent to the front lines. And then there is a major highway that would basically allow Ukraine to expand and get to Starobilsk and then get towards the Severodonetsk and so on. So that's a couple points of contact where Ukrainians are fighting really hard and Ukrainians are trying to advance, but no luck there. There is significant resistance in that area. Around Bakhmut, the Russian forces keep pushing. We can finally say that after, 2 months now or something, like almost a month and a half, Kodema has been taken. By this point, we know for sure because it's kind of surrounded by the hills from this side, and now we know that Ukrainians have fall back from the hills. A lot of people think, oh no, but that means that Russia took a little bit of more land. Again, this does not matter because it's super tactical. This is one of the only 2 directions where Russian advances are still going on. And advances is actually too fancy of a word to say for what they're achieving. So this is mostly done by the Wagner group, and they're trying to push to Bakhmut. They have no forces to capture Bakhmut. It's going to be fine. Now, around Pisky and this area here, we knew that Ukraine attacked here earlier, but this is another area where intense fighting is going on. Russians are trying to push, but as far as I've heard, this is more of a now very, 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 very positional fighting. Russians here are running out of supplies and troops, so they need some fresh forces and they don't have any. Now, the southern part, and now I'm talking only what Russians are reporting. The Russians are reporting that Ukrainians are gathering up along this area, and this might be interesting, but this is something I'm going to talk in the second part of the video. There has been a column of transport that we know that left Melitopol and they went for Crimea. And we also know that there has been a column of different troops and people related to military that went from Crimea towards Russia. I think that this is not forces of Russia, maybe some of them, maybe some of the injured people, but most of these, I believe that they are either civilians that came in to support the regime of Russia here, or it's the families of the troops that thought that Russia here stays forever, so they came in essentially to take over the freed apartments that Ukrainians left after themselves, essentially finders keepers because their family was there. And around Kherson area, whatever we talked about before still applies. Ukrainians are attritioning the Russians. There is a discussion about the Russians to surrender, which is, I still think, is a major information warfare because nothing has been proved whatsoever. So we should not expect that major changes are gonna happen in this area. Russians are in a trap. They don't have a way out. They don't have it good. It's going to take a while. So there's going to be still time for us to talk about this. There's nothing is happening. But Ukrainians are trying to push towards Davidov Brid around this area, but it's all tactical level. And if you want tactical level, I recommend looking some other channels, especially reporting from Ukraine. He's reporting really fast and reporting very much on tactical situation and why certain actions have been done. And if you're into that kind of content, you're very welcome to look up at him. And that clears it up. The first part that I wanted to talk about. If you're here for Just for the Map, thank you so much. If you can subscribe, like this video before leaving, I would appreciate it. And for everyone else who's staying here, let's talk about the targets. So let's talk about Luhansk region. I don't consider this part of the Kharkiv region as anything significant because there's not any significant cities in the area. There's not much. So we know that right now the rain season is slowly but surely clawing in. And that means only one thing. That means that the fields are no more becoming uneasy. It doesn't mean that you can just cross the field anymore. So you are pretty much starting to get bound by the roads. That means control of the roads is the control of the battlefield by this point in the year for Ukraine. So we can just quickly then zoom out, look where the main roads are, and that tells us the whole picture. You don't even need me to explain it. It is obviously Starobilsk, it is obviously Svatove, and it's obviously Kremina. Now, I previously talked about Starobilsk, and then there is this rail line. And important part is, obviously, yes, I know, and people corrected me, this is a very secondary rail line. Obviously, the Luhansk region part that is held by the Russian occupiers is supported from the Rostov area. So it's supported from this side rather than from the Ukrainian north side. That is clear. I'm just saying that there was a railroad that they could have used. But obviously Starobilsk, because there is this road towards Luhansk. Svatove, because it's a big hub in this whole region. So think about this being sort of an Izium only of this Luhansk area. And this is very, very sparsely populated. There is very little urban settlements in this area. So there is not much things to fight for. Mostly it's going to be the road that matters. And obviously Kremina, which is the gateway to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. And Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, that's kind of the big goal here. It's a secondary agglomeration. I forgot the precise words. It's a fancy new word that I learned from the start of the word. Basically, city. It's a twin cities that is separated by a river, and they are very relevant for any kind of mass. It's a major citadel in the area. So if Ukraine can take the citadel from there, they can launch attacks whichever directions. And obviously, Russians by this point don't have the forces to recapture them. So how do we get to these cities? Well, the first one I already explained to you. It's Yampil, Liman, and Bilohorivka. It's not really Bilohorivka. It's just around this area here, so towards Kremina. And basically, this is what we need to follow. If any of these falls, well, Yampil may be more about as a supporting position, but still, it's a highway towards Kremina, and then Kremina right now is empty, and this will open basically the attack towards the Severodonetsk and then towards north, towards Svatove. The second option for Ukrainians is from these two areas, either here, obviously by secondary roads, or by the main roads, which is kind of more relevant from Kupiansk-Vizlovy. Now, in the central area, I think that for now, Ukrainians are fine in this area, and the only thing that Ukrainians need to do is hold the town of Bakhmut. Bakhmut is essentially another major road hub, as you can see, and this would allow to launch attacks either towards Popasna, which is would be a big target to recapture because Popasna is a big defensive line for Ukrainians. And then obviously Debaltseve, Alchevsk, that would be very juicy targets to get because those are major. Like Alchevsk, you can think about this as a Bakhmut on the opposite side. It's a major road hub in the area, and Debaltseve as well. Especially Debaltseve, it's a big railway network hub, and if Ukraine will be able to repair railways towards it, it would allow to get supplies a lot easier on the front lines, and that would help a lot when we're talking about siege of Donetsk that will come at some point. Now, this front line is very hard. This is probably the most manned front line in the whole theater of war in Ukraine. So I don't expect. Obviously, the main prize here is Donetsk. Like that's a no-brainer. But to get to Donetsk, well, that's another question. I think that Donetsk needs to be sieged. So I would think that Ukrainians will kind of not capture, but encircle it from all sides. And I don't see Ukrainians really storming Donetsk. It's a huge city. It's a massive city. It's the thing that Ukrainians don't have the resources to basically storm and capture right now. They would have to dedicate almost their whole army to storm it. So there is no taking of Donetsk by Ukrainians in a storming fashion. That's why I was so surprised when Ukrainians also launched attack towards it. That doesn't really make sense. Like it's not that they can just go in and capture it. The south side. Okay, so in the south, a lot of people are looking at Mariupol, and Mariupol is important. That is true. But I think what is more relevant for Ukrainians is actually the city of Berdyansk. That is relevant because, well, Mariupol, it's like if Ukraine can take Mariupol, then they will cut this whole in half. But the same kind of can be said if they capture Berdyansk. But capturing Berdyansk would actually allow Ukrainians to go on this small peninsula here, and they would actually be able to use their rocket systems to strike the Kerch Bridge, finally. That's why Berdyansk would be a very, very juicy target for Ukrainians to capture. So I would definitely look out if Ukraine will launch the attack on the south, which is, I'm not sure if they will. I'm going to talk about it just a little bit later. And obviously the next one is something that I underscore every time, is the triangle Tokmak, Melitopol, and Enerhodar. This triangle is what holds this whole offensive. Well, not even like this, like more like this thing. Like this whole thing basically holds on this triangle to exist. If this triangle stops being supported, if Tokmak falls, Tokmak is a smaller version of Melitopol, and if Tokmak falls, this will essentially makes all this part obsolete. And then Melitopol is basically the juicy target. Melitopol holds everything, and from there, it's gone. But Enerhodar obviously is the second biggest, so if Tokmak and Enerhodar falls, that would allow Ukrainian basically to take over this side of the offensive, and this opens up, basically, they don't have to take Melitopol, so they can kind of walk around it, and that would threaten Crimea, and they can cut all the connections, so it's a triangle that needs to be held all together. That's pretty much the juicy targets for Ukrainians. So if you put it on the map, it's here, here, Mariupol, Berdyansk. There's here. I think it was here. Then it was there, and it was Svatove, and it was this, and Lysychansk. So you can basically take, well, obviously Kherson. That's another big thing. That's pretty much the list of strategic targets for Ukraine to capture on the Russian side. And obviously, if this was too obvious for you, then you've been following this close enough, and I'm really glad that it was there. But if you kind of still trying to understand after the new offensive that Ukraine made, maybe you had your interest just rose up and you're not trying to understand what's the situation, what Ukraine wants, That's what Ukraine wants. This is what will help Ukraine win the war. And to round it all up, Ukraine has been winning this war because Russia has two major weaknesses, their forces. One is the problems with intelligence, and the second is problems with logistics. And whatever Ukraine did so far has been striking those two weaknesses. They did Kharkiv because their logistics were supplying Kherson, and they didn't have intelligence about the gathering forces around Kharkiv. I'm expecting the next offensive to exploit the same weaknesses, so I don't expect Ukraine to give Russia a fair fight. That's why predicting where Ukraine will strike is pretty much impossible. Keep a map of strategic targets, and once we know that the action has started, you will be able to then dedicate and understand when Ukraine is winning, when it's not.